Yortzeit tonight. Don't know how old she would have been. Rachel, sorry, one sec. Let's go there. So Rachel, so her name was Etta Rachel Bat Aaron, and we knew her as Boba Rachel. And my brother's youngest daughter's name was that's quite a she had a tough life, but she taught us good values, and she even told us when we were younger. My dad told me when we were kids in the pram, don't marry a shiksa. She said that. It worked with some of our family, unfortunately, not all. Yeah, but she had good values, and may she rest in peace, and Amen. Hopefully, and for anyone else, any other dedications?
No, I just obviously wish all the cholim of Klal Yisrael well, and may all the Jews be safe in everywhere in the world, especially in Ukraine, and may they make Aliyah to the Holy Land.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, here we go. Okay, continuing with Shabbos now. Okay, this is quite an interesting. A lot of this is actually very topical, and relevant. Paying bills through an automated paying service. The question that was asked: many banks offer a service whereby customers may instruct the bank to pay their utility or other bills on a specific date of the month. Should one refrain from using this service, since eventually a payment will be made on his behalf on Shabbos or Yom Tov?
Can they guess? Can the guys guess?
So the answer is...
can the guys guess, Kev? Let the guys guess. Let them take a guess.
Yeah.
Let them... Gavin, you have a guess?
Gavin, what do you think? The guys.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sorry. No, the answer is that you... what is the question again? Sorry. Yes, you can do it. You can do it. Yeah, you can do it. I remember now. I came
what
back
do you say, Arthur?
Yes, and the reason. I want the reason.
And the reason is because you're not authorizing it on a specific day. So you're just authorizing it for it to happen. It could happen anytime. When they decide to do it, it's very similar to that example you did as well, where recently, I think Kevin gave the example, or Damon, one of you, a very similar type example.
I say it's not because it's authorized on that day. You can't make a debit order come off every Saturday. But if it happens on the 6th of the month, and sometimes it lands on a Saturday, your instruction wasn't for Saturday. It's an automated process that happens to occasionally fall on a Saturday. Therefore, you're not instructing it and focusing it towards Saturday, which is, I think, what Gavin's saying.
It's exactly what I was trying to say.
And it's
that's what I meant to say.
It would be totally impractical. How would you have to change it every month?
How would you avoid it every month and follow it?
Exactly. You have to check the calendar, and it's
okay. Ken, what's the answer?
Exactly. So it says there is no halachic reason not to use the service. While it is true that eventually a payment date will fall on Shabbos, and one may not instruct a non-Jew even before Shabbos to perform a service on his behalf on Shabbos. In this case, there is no action performed by a non-Jew on Shabbos. The entire process from beginning to the end is automated. The bill is paid through a computer transaction from one account to the other. There is no halakhic restriction on having a machine perform a service on Shabbos on behalf of a Jew, if the machine is programmed in advance to do so. Okay. And the next question, we won't... Sorry, yeah?
Can I ask you a favor? At some point, when you're doing your research to find stuff for us material, the one thing I'd like to know is the same type of question, whether we can operate a business, an online web business, e-commerce on Shabbos.
Okay, the next question says that, keeping a website open on Shabbos, but we'll do that next time because it's quite...
But let's do that. We'll do that on Monday. I want to hear the answer. I'm very curious on that.
It says keeping a website open. Okay, so the question
a
is...
website, yes, but not an e-commerce. My guess is that the website is not having a payment gateway, but any money that's earned from a website on Shabbos would be a problem to use.
The same as having a business open, a physical store.
Yeah.
So let's see what it says there. Let's see what it says. Well, I'm getting my whole company putting my son's name, and the Bet Din say that that's 100%.
If you can't share in the profits for Saturday.
They said it's not a problem. I spoke to Rabbi Smith and Rabbi
great.
Smith.
That's fantastic.
They said I'm very fortunate in a way that I married a goy. Very unusual. So because I married a goy, they said that I've actually come out winning, because I can theoretically, because they said to me I can put the whole business. Well, the business has always been in their name, and it's still in their name. So I don't have
We'd
any
like to
dusters
say
name.
that our sponsors, the opinions of our audience are not reflected in our sponsors.
Do we have sponsors? I didn't even know we had.
We don't.
That's great.
I'm just saying it's
not for much longer anyway.
Not necessarily reflect the views of our audience.
Well, okay. I thought we were being sponsored by Turbovite, by marijuana, and by what else? Something else. What does he do? Arthur. And by his electric bike. I don't know.
And by heart medication, by Pfizer and whatever. All right, guys.
No, but he's reduced that a lot as well. He's done well there. He's reduced it.
Let's get started, guys. We've got a little bit of time. So let's just see where we ended off yesterday, on Thursday. So, Rav Zevid said, because there was he came to the defense of Rav, and he said, in fact, the entire brisa refers to before the original owner's despair. And what are we dealing with here in the brisa's middle case when it rules that the second thief who stole the animal from the buyer is liable to the twofold payment? We're dealing with where the original owner despaired of recovering the stolen animal after it was in possession of the buyer. But the original owner did not despair while it was in the possession of the first thief. Hence, there was despair to affect the buyer's acquisition. So what Rav Zevid was basically saying is there was a bit of a difficulty, because we wanted to know how it was possible that you could have a twofold payment and a fourfold and a fivefold payment. That was the difficulty, because this is the slight trick here. A first thief steals it from the original owner, and in that case, the original owner despairs. But if he despairs at that point, then the thief ends up owning it. So if he sells it to the buyer, which is a legitimate sale, we understand, bless you, Kev, why the second thief pays the twofold payment to the buyer, because there was despair. So even according to Rav, who says that you don't need a location in addition with despair, that's valid. But then the problem arises is, why does the first thief have to pay the fourfold payment? Because it's his animal he's selling. In other words, after the original owner gave up hope of getting it, it's now acquired by the thief. And therefore, why should he pay for an animal a penalty of 4 or 5-fold that he's selling to the buyer? Okay, we can understand why the second thief that started from the buyer is paying the twofold, because the buyer now owns it. Whether you hold by Rav or not, despair plus a change of location affects acquisition. But certainly, even in the case of Rav, despair alone affects acquisition without a change of location. So it's saying even without the change of location, it doesn't necessarily prove that you need that. And despair alone might affect acquisition, but we got the problem with the 4 or 5-fold payment. Because let me mute you guys, because you all got the through. So unless they're sponsored by Vic Mays or Rav, we've got a problem. So, all right. So what I'm saying to you is as follows, is that the problem is, how do you have a case where there's a 4 or 5-fold payment and a 2-fold payment? Can everybody see what the problem is? Why you would need a buyer? Guys, I want each of your answers. Guys, unmute yourself one by one.
Why you would need a buyer?
I'm testing you. What's the problem? Arthur, let me test you first.
Oh, yeah, of course you're going to come to me first, the one that hasn't selected. Yes. What would you like to know, Lord Almighty One?
No, that's Hashem. But what he really would want to know from you guys is, what's the problem of the 4 and 5-fold as well as the 2-fold? What's the logical problem about that?
To who, though? To the thief, or I mean,
why would there be a 4-fold and 5-fold for the first thief and a 2-fold for the second thief? Because there's a problem. I want you guys to articulate what the problem is. I know you can.
I can articulate it.
That's why I wanted to just squeeze your other two compadres over there just to see if they can. come to you. Since Arthur's done Rabbi Cohen, this would be a cinch.
Yeah, of course. No. So how many hours did you have last night and this morning and the last couple of days?
Just do your best, mate.
Okay, so the problem with the twofold, and the fivefold, from the first guy to the second, well, the first thief and the second thief is, well, I suppose the second thief can't. Listen, don't mock the invalid, okay?
Fair enough.
Do my best.
Okay. That's right.
So the. Hold on, I'm having a brain freeze. Okay, so the second thief can never have no. You go for it, Kevin. I saw you.
Kev, you want to go first?
Okay, I'll try my best, Damon. I don't know if I'll get it right.
No problem. Just try.
But the first thief who originally steals for the first time and sells it or slaughters it has to pay a fourfold or fivefold. So why shouldn't the second, the guy that stole it from the first thief also pay a fourfold? Why is he only paying a twofold?
Okay, that's a good question. It's not the thing, but I want to answer it because it's a reasonable question. Because in order for the second thief to pay a four or fivefold, he has to not only steal it, but sell it or slaughter it. It's incumbent because of the pasuk. So it's a fair question.
So he's only paying the twofold because it's
he never then he didn't
change the form of it.
Yes,
or sell it.
He didn't change the location, or he didn't sell it, or he didn't slaughter it. Therefore, just then there's only the twofold. There's the kefil, as well as the original. There's the penalty and the compensatory amount. There's no four or fivefold in that case. You have to slaughter it or sell it in order for the four or fivefold to kick in.
And also there's also no embarrassment.
No, the embarrassment. No, the embarrassment is a different issue. The embarrassment that you talk about is a good point. The embarrassment is the reason you pay a fourfold when you're carrying a sheep. Is it's very embarrassing to sit there running around and having a sheep on you and stinks you to high heaven and it's embarrassing. So therefore, you should pay a fivefold payment for a sheep, just like for an ox a fivefold payment. Because again, you're still paying on the weight of the animal and the worth of the animal. You're just paying 5 times what that weight and worth is. It's not that you're paying less for a sheep because it weighs less. Again, we're talking about duplication of penalty. So if it, depending on the breed of sheep and the age, etc., if you said there was a fivefold penalty for the sheep or the ox, and there's nothing to do with the sheep is less heavy, so you're paying fourfold. You're paying less because the sheep weighs less, but you're still paying 4 or 5 times. The reason why you only pay fourfold for the sheep is because you're embarrassingly stealing it. You're losing having to pay 1/5 extra because you've submitted yourself to embarrassment. So you must be kind of desperate. Whereas an ox with dignity, you're walking it out of the abode. And if you're noticed by people, they generally don't think you're stealing it because, it seems as though it's yours. And therefore, since you haven't lost any dignity in the act, you get the full penalty of the law. Whereas if you've suffered embarrassment, that's part of your tikkun, where you're paying 4/5, not 5/5. So that's where the embarrassment comes in. Of the renders you how you steal the animal. And it came to say, was there a case where you pay a 4 or 5-fold for another animal, just like the laws of Shabbos, if you're putting a smaller animal and you're embarrassing yourself like you would steal a sheep? That's how that also was eventually discussed. And we said, no, there's no Gezerah Shabbos. Gavin, answer the question what the logical problem is with the 4 and 5-fold and the 2-fold payment.
Well, you have more or less answered it with Kevin. You basically did.
No, I haven't. Because there's a problem.
Okay, well, so I'll tell you what. Well, I'll tell you what the problem. Okay. So let me go back. Maybe you didn't answer it. So
sure. I did. So he had a separate problem. He had a separate problem to my question.
No, but it was related though. Okay, so let me see. I thought you answered it, so maybe I don't have it then. So this is what I was thinking, that you can't. He shouldn't be paying the 2-fold payment at all, in theory, because he's stealing it from if he's stealing it from a thief. So we know he's stealing it from a buyer. So there's no problem if there's a buyer involved, because if there's a buyer involved, if there's a fourfold payment, no, there can't be a buyer involved if there's a fourth. Yes, there can be a buyer. So fourfold, no. And if it's in your possession, that's where the problem comes in. If it's gone, if I'm almost right, eh?
You continue. I just want you to play it out a bit.
I know, but I've lost track. So the basic problem is that this thief, once he sold it, he shouldn't be penalized for the fourfold payment at all. He shouldn't be. And the other guy, if he sold it, should be penalized for the two, which is correct. But he shouldn't be penalized for the fourfold payment at all. So that doesn't make sense once you sold it.
All right, I have to clear up one or two details though. Let me continue.
Yeah, just help me a bit, Damon. I'm in the right direction, mate. Just help me a bit.
So, okay, this is the contradiction. Okay, firstly, Rav is trying to prove that despair alone affects acquisition. It seemed originally that it used the example of the buyer to prove that despair alone does not affect acquisition. Need, in addition, a change of location from the thief to the buyer's domain. So we're saying it can't go according to Rav. And the truth of it, Rav Zevid said it can, providing the original owner despairs first. You don't need a change of location. You really, really don't. In fact, the reason being is that that's not necessary. Why you need a buyer to be involved is not to prove necessarily that a change of location is needed in addition to despair to affect acquisition. It's needed because you've got a logical problem using it as one case instead of three cases. These are the three cases. Okay, the one case is where a first thief steals an animal, slaughters it. The second thief steals that slaughtered animals and pays a twofold payment. Okay, now that's not difficult to understand why it pays a twofold payment, because the physical change of slaughtering the animal renders that animal the thief's due to the physical change. So that's not a proof of acquisition through despair at all. It's a proof of acquisition through physical change. And therefore the second thief, on that basis alone, whether there's despair or not, the physical change is enough to affect acquisition, whether or not there's despair. So that doesn't prove or disprove anything. So that case is then set aside. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because the physical change makes sure that the first thief owns the article, and therefore if the second thief steals the carcass from the first thief, he pays a twofold payment because the thief is now the owner due to the physical act of slaughtering the animal. So therefore, that just proves physical change affects acquisition. Whether or not it needs the owner's despair is irrelevant. So that case is put aside. Now we only have two cases left. And that case is the first thief steals an animal from the original owner, okay? And the second thief, in that case, if he steals the original animal from the owner, he only pays back the principal. And he pays back the principal to the first thief for two reasons. Guys, listen carefully. The first reason is it uses the word Geneva, robbery. There's a gazlan. There's theft and then there's robbery. Kevin, what are the two words for theft?
Ganef and Gezel.
Gezel. So a gazlan, a robber. There you only pay back the principal. There's no twofold payment. So according to that one argument, the second thief put a gun to the head of the first thief and said, I will steal your animal for the evening. Thank you for the business. And therefore, he only pays back a principal. That's according to the one opinion. According to the other opinion is that it's called grama, causative damage. In other words, the first thief could have at that point returned the original animal back to the owner. Because again, he never slaughtered it. So Betsy was alive and well. And the same cow they all came to love. And Betsy wasn't put to another owner and therefore was redeemable. So at that point, the original thief the first thief could have returned it to the original owner. By the second thief stealing it from the first thief, it was a case of theft, not robbery. He pays the twofold payment. Sorry, he only pays back the principal, not the twofold payment, because he's now cost the first thief money. Because if he can't get back the original animal, he's now cost the first thief money. Don't get me wrong, the first thief has to pay the 4- or 5-fold payment, depending if it was a sheep or ox. But the reason that the second thief has to pay the first thief money is he did cost the first thief the principal. So everybody pays that did the damage. So the second thief pays the first thief the principal, simply because he stopped the first thief from returning the animal. So now he needs that money to pay back. So the second thief has to supply it because he caused the act. So whether you want to say it's a case of robbery, in which case only the principal has to be paid, or a case of theft, but he's rendered damage to the first thief because he can't return the animal. In that particular case, I saw the background change, nice. In that particular case, there's still only the principal that goes to the first thief. But we could come to an erroneous conclusion there. And this erroneous conclusion could happen according to the third case, because if the first thief sells the animal to the buyer, the second thief that steals the animal from the buyer pays the twofold payment. Why? Because if you want to say despair effects acquisition, in other words, what happens is the thief now, upon hearing that somebody else owns the animal, has given up hope of it, that despair, either way, there was despair, plus a change of location to the buyer, assumes that that's why the thief pays the twofold. Because look at this. The second thief never paid the twofold to the original thief. Second thief only paid the principal back to the original thief. So you could come along and say despair alone does not effect acquisition. Otherwise, the second thief would pay the first thief a twofold payment, because now the first thief owns it due to the original owner's despair. And the only reason in this case with the buyer that the second thief pays the buyer twofold is the despair of the original owner, coupled with the change of location from the thief to the new buyer, effects acquisition. And that's a proof against Rav. So Rav Zevid said, no, it's not the case. It's not the case at all. The reason why you need that is because despair kicked in at a slightly different point. It kicked in when the original owner realized he wasn't going to get it back. Why? Because he heard it was slaughtered. At that point, it becomes the thief, because you'll never get back the pet in the condition you left it at. Or when it's sold, at that point you give up hope at recovering it, because the despair was obviously kicked in after the purchase took place, and since you know those facts with the thief, retroactively the sale was valid. So that's not a proof that despair with a change of location is necessary. Despair alone is necessary. So then the question that the Gemara asks is that, why do you need then this case of the buyer? Because you could come to the erroneous conclusion perhaps that without the buyer, you're not proving that despair alone affects acquisition, and you need the buyer as a change of location to prove it. Otherwise, the second thief should pay the first thief double. That's the question that the Gemara asks. Okay, you get it now? Guys? So, what happens in this particular case? What happens in this particular case is that the Gemara has a particular statement, and it said, look, there's an issue. In other words, the Gemara anticipates a counter argument. So I'm going to tell you Rav Zevid's argument, the counter argument, and while we deal with it the way we do. So in fact, the entire brisa refers to before the original owner's despair. And what are we dealing with here in the brisa's middle case when it rules that the second thief who stole the animal from the buyer is liable to the twofold payment. We are dealing with where the original owner despaired of recovering the stolen animal after it was in possession of the buyer, but the original owner did not despair while it was in possession of the first thief. Hence, there was despair to affect the buyer's acquisition. And then, in fact, that's why the second thief who stole the animal from the buyer did, in fact, steal from the new owner, because the second thief is liable to pay the twofold penalty, not because of a change of location, but merely because at that point the original owner gave up ever having getting control of it, because it's just now gone to another party. So it wasn't trying to prove that you need a change of location in addition to despair. So the Gemara, so despair alone means that was enough to effect the buyer's acquisition. So the Gemara anticipates a counter argument and rejects it. And it says, do not say that, on the contrary, the reason the Brisa gives the example of the second thief being liable to the twofold payment only in its second case where he stole the animal from a buyer, rather than the first case where he stole the animal from the first thief, is that we need despair in conjunction with a change of domain in order to effect acquisition. Okay? Rather, the Brisa can hold that even despair alone can effect acquisition of the stolen article while it's still held by the thief. But the Brisa presents a case in which the despair occurred after the animal was removed from the first thief's possession, because you cannot find a case in which both of them, the first thief and the second thief, pay multiple payments. The first thief, as we know, the 4 or 5-fold, and the second thief, the 2-fold, other than in this way, where the original owner did not despair while the stolen animal was in the possession of the first thief. Okay, so what it's saying here is you've got a bit of a problem. And that problem is that, according to Rav Zevid's explanation of Rav, is that the primary difficulty is that you got this catch-22. What is it? So, Gavin, this catch-22 is as follows, is that if the second thief has a twofold payment, okay, it's because the despair effected acquisition.
Yeah, okay? I left that out, and I realized it.
Okay, so in some manner. So in the case of the slaughtering of the animal, it's easy because the physical change to effected acquisition. In regard to despair, we only found that with the case of the buyer involved, so it seems like despair plus a change of location effects acquisition, and Rav Zevid says it's not the case. It's the reason why there was despair alone, and it doesn't need a change of location, is when the original owner heard that the first thief sold it to a buyer, at that point he despaired of it, because he thought, I'll never get it back now. And then at this later stage, a second thief stole it. So when it came to court, that despair alone effected acquisition. But the reason why we can't use the case of when the first thief steals the item that the second thief pays him anything more than the principal back was A, because there was no despair that occurred. So therefore, the first thief never owned it. In that case, and he hadn't sold it to any other party. Forget about a change of location, because we learn a pasuk that says only if you slaughter or steal or sell the animal does the 4-fold or 5-fold payment kick in. But he said if you want to think it's about a change of location, it's not, because the problem that comes up is very, very simple. If the owner, you have to say that despair hadn't kicked in the first case, because if despair had kicked in, why would the first thief pay a 4-fold or 5-fold payment? He wouldn't, because it's his animal at that point. And then the second thief, it makes sense that he pays a 2-fold to the first thief. There's no issue with that. Okay, there's no issue with that. But then why would the first thief pay a 4 or 5-fold? So, because either the second thief wouldn't pay a 2-fold. In other words, the reason why the first thief pays a 4 or 5-fold is because despair has not kicked in, and therefore he's still eligible to pay the 4 or 5-fold, because when that animal disappears, he's stealing somebody else's animal. And that's why the second thief only pays the principal, because despair has not occurred yet by the original owner. That's why only a principal is paid by the second thief to the first thief. But when it's sold to the buyer, it's not that the change of location in addition to despair is an argument against Rav. It's a case of the fact that while it was in possession of the first thief and it was stolen, the original owner thought he'd get it back. Therefore, the 4 or 5-fold payment was eligible, okay, at that point, because he stole it. And since he was eligible, he still owes that. Then at the point where he then sold it, and the original owner heard through the grapevine it was sold, he then gave up. But the first thief already caused that giving up because his act was preemptive before the owner despaired. Only after he discovered what happened did he give up. And at that point, he still owes the penalty for having sold it because he sold somebody else's animal. This is according to Rav Zevid, right? And at that point, when the original owner despaired after he heard through the grapevine, it's now gone to a buyer. At that point, it became the buyer's because actually despair took place at that point. And therefore, when the second thief stole it from the buyer, that's why he pays the twofold. But you can't pay a 4 or 5-fold and a twofold because either the first thief owns it or he doesn't. If he owns it, why should he have to pay a 4 or 5-fold according to Rav Zevid for selling an animal that he's owned through despair? Because when the original owner despaired, he's selling his own animal. He's despaired, therefore the thief is acquiring it, and therefore he can slaughter the animal. It's his animal he's slaughtering or selling. So we understand why the second thief would pay the twofold, but we can't understand why the first thief would pay the 4 or 5-fold. So you have to have this case at which despair hadn't kicked in, and then despair did kick in. And for that, you need an intermediary party. But it's not necessarily a proof that a change of location in addition to despair affects acquisition. It could be, but it could also be that it's not needed. But despair alone only kicked in when it was heard through the grapevine that he sold it to another party. And at the point of despair, the buyer's acquisition actually took place, so that when the second thief stole it, is eligible to the twofold. And the first thief is eligible to the 4 or 5-fold simply because there was no despair up until the point that he sold it. And for the fact that he sold somebody else's animal, that's why he pays the 4-fold and 5-fold. He didn't, the despair never clicked in. Otherwise, he can sell his animal or slaughter his animal. If despair kicks in, the animal's his. He can slaughter or sell it. And he doesn't have to pay the 4 or 5-fold. That was according to some opinions. But despair hadn't kicked in at that point. All right, guys, we're done. Make sense?
Damon?
Yeah, 100%.
So despair, okay, this just from
sure.
Looking at despair on its own, if there's despair, then there's only a 2-fold payment.
No. So this is what I'm saying, is that if Kevin's right. So what Kevin is actually saying is, if somebody just stole it and they hadn't sold it or slaughtered it, there's only a 2-fold payment. That's absolutely correct, Kevin. That's absolutely
no, if there's this, despair means he doesn't own it anymore.
No. If there's despair,
he's given up ownership, basically.
Well, it doesn't matter. The 2-fold payment is for normal theft. Anyway, we just don't reward the first thief. We don't reward the first thief for the 2-fold payment. Because the original owner, whether he despairs or not, is eligible to a 2-fold payment for theft, not for robbery. Because in the pasuk, how do we find this? In the pasuk, it said, he shall pay double. Which means anytime you steal something, if you don't come clean before the witnesses come against a person, then they have to pay the 2-fold. If they say, listen, I did wrong, I stole it, then they only have to pay the principal or return the original item. But if witnesses come against them, they pay the 2-fold. The 4 or 5-fold is only for a sheep or an ox. Okay, 4-fold for a sheep or 5-fold for an ox. Gab, are you with me?
I am, yeah. My phone just dropped. Sorry.
All right, only for a 4 or 5-fold, 4-fold for a sheep and 5-fold for an ox, but only if the thief sells or slaughters it. Okay, does that kick in? So it seems that the pasuk says there's a 4 or 5-fold if the thief sells it or slaughters it. So it's not only the theft, it's in conjunction with the sale or slaughter of that animal. But then the other argument is, why should they be eligible for paying it if despair is kicked in with the original owner? So there's some opinions that say if despair hasn't kicked in, there's a 4 or 5-fold, and others that say if despair has kicked in, there's a 4 or 5-fold, because the person is sinning twice. He's actually stolen it, and he's now done another Aveira. So there's two opinions. But the twofold has nothing to do with despair. The twofold has to do with the fact, you see, the whole argument of this despair came up with, we say, is that, listen, we know that a physical change renders the animal to the new owner. So why wouldn't it do it with the thief? If that physical change gives it to the thief and he owns it, why should he pay the 4 or 5-fold payment? That's how this whole argument started, with physical change, way before despair. So we're saying if the thief slaughtered it, why should he pay the 4 or 5-fold? Because by slaughtering it, he's acquired it. And since it's his animal, why does he have to pay for slaughtering his own animal 4 or 5-fold? That's how the whole argument started. And the same was selling the animal.